Hanukkah, the festival of lights, usually falling between November and December every year on the 25th of Kislev in the Hebrew month. It is considered one of the most important holidays in all of the world and is celebrated and recognized internationally as one of the most important of all Jewish culture and religion. From the menorah with its 8 beautiful candles and one in the middle, to the dreidel symbolizing Jewish life and practice, to the latkes and jelly donuts, it is one of the most popular and festive times in Judaism. And Jews of all sorts and stripes practice it no matter what level of observance, whether they be Ashkenazi, Sephardic, Mizrahi, whether they be observant Orthodox or secular Jews. The holiday is steeped in history and tradition, going back to the time of Alexander the Great and the conquest of Israel by the Greeks. The Greek army under Alexander was extraordinarily formidable, and starting in 336, the ambitious young king swept out of Macedonia and Greece, conquering as much of the world as he possibly could, building the largest land empire at the time, using his mighty phalanxes and incredible cavalry and extremely good battle tactics to defeat his enemies, conquering Egypt, the Middle East, Persia, Turkey, known as Asia Minor at the time, and of course, the land of Palestine, including Israel. The Greek armies were formidable and could never be defeated. And at the Battle of Gaugamela in 331, Alexander defeated his greatest foe, Darius, and the Persians, who owned the land of Israel. After Alexander's sudden death in 323, the land was divided by his 4 generals, Ptolemy, Seleucus, Antiochus, and Lysander. Eventually, Seleucus became the most powerful of them all, claiming most of the middle of the land as well as that of Israel. And at this time, Greek culture, religion, and tradition started to spread throughout the world in what became known as Hellenism, as the 4 different kingdoms dominated the Middle East and the ancient world. As the ancient Near East came under the sway of Greek art, literature, culture, poetry, and playwrights, and the philosophy of the ancient Greeks, including Plato, Aristotle, and Socrates, began to influence the local cultures, the local traditions of the monotheistic Jewish people who had lived in the land for centuries, eventually being resettled by the Persians in the 500s, came under threat. However, as long as the Greeks honored the Jews and their practices and their monotheistic religion, they were safe. But this was all to be challenged with Antiochus IV Epiphanes, a Seleucid Greek king who believed that it was his goal and his job given to him by the gods to impress upon his subjects the Greek religion, culture, and practices. He began to force the Jews to worship Greek gods. He desecrated the Jewish temple, which was a national symbol that had stood for nearly 4 centuries. And he also outlawed the Sabbath as well as the reading of the Old Testament. This horrified the Jews, whose religion had bound them together for centuries despite multiple exiles and the loss of their state. And they raised a revolt in 175 known as the Maccabean Revolt, led by Judas Maccabeus and his family. The revolt saw an upset as the mighty Greek armies of the Seleucids were defeated by the mighty Jewish forces, an upset of astronomical proportions of the ancient world, as the Jews fought tooth and nail to be able to hold on to their old way of life, their monotheism, and their ability to live in their own land. This victory saw them repel the Hellenization that was so common in the ancient Near East, and saw them establish their own kingdom with their own ability to practice and worship as they pleased, and live their lives as Jews as they had for millennia at this period. They had lost their land before. They had lost their practices and their customs. They weren't about to lose it this time, and Maccabeus' revolt was successful, and by 168, the tyrant, Epiphanes, was driven out, and the Jewish people had achieved a state of semi-independence that would continue for more than a century with a kingdom set up by Maccabeus and his family. In order to celebrate their massive victory and the freedom of their people, they decided to rededicate the temple on the 25th day of the month of Kislev in 168, between November and December. The rededication of the temple meant a lot. This was the symbol of Judaism. In order to rededicate the temple, they needed to light the menorah, the ancient symbol of the light of God given to them in the ancient days, according to the book of Exodus. However, when they came to light the menorah, they found that there was very little oil left in the lamp, and that it would only last a night or two. However, the most amazing thing happened. During the festival of the opening of the temple, the oil lasted for 8 days, meaning that they were able to use it day in and day out to fill up the menorah and continue the practice. It was seen as a miracle and a triumph of their victory and the approval of the divine upon their fortunes and efforts, and it would become one of the most well-celebrated religious holidays in all of history. Even as the Jews lost their land and their freedom to the Romans, and even as their temple was destroyed, even as they were displaced once again in 136 with the Bar Kokhba revolt, when Hadrian destroyed Israel, exiled the Jews, and renamed the land Palestine. The Jews continued to practice the art and festival of lights, Hanukkah, spreading it all around the world, be they Mizrahim, Sephardic, or Ashkenazi. And as many of the Jews settled in Europe, they adopted new traditions and dietary patterns, such as the latkes and the jelly donuts that would become synonymous with the celebration of the Festival of Lights. And even as they came to a new world over 1,000 years later, nearly 2,000 years after the first Hanukkah, they decided to embrace and continue the festival even in a new land, as they had left the Eastern Hemisphere behind for the Western Hemisphere. And with them, they brought their customs and their cultures, most commonly in the late 19th century, as many Jews immigrated to North America, especially the United States. These Jews readapted Hanukkah and its celebration in the new lands of New York City, Chicago, and the East Coast. And even as they regained their land after World War II, and as Israel became a state in 1948, the celebration of Hanukkah and the Festival of Lights continued and continues to this day to be a symbol of the victory of Israel, the independence of their people, and their ability to survive with light that shines from without and from within. It has become one of the most popular holidays with many different traditions that symbolize the fastidiousness and resolve of these monotheistic people in the face of great challenges, of those rebelling against empire and imperialism, and those who simply wish to live their lives free of persecution and difficulty and to enjoy the light that comes from within and from without.